I shouldn't be speaking right now. Not to you, not to anyone, not even to myself. But silence has teeth, and the longer I keep this inside, the sharper they get. So, listen carefully, because every word I say comes with a price, and by the time you hear this, you'll be paying it too. This isn't a story, it's a confession, and if you're still here after that warning, then it's already too late for both of us. You've probably heard about cursed objects, haunted houses, books that shouldn't be read. But the thing I stumbled across, it wasn't written, it wasn't built, it wasn't even alive in the way you'd think. It was something carved out of absence. A throne, but not of gold or stone. A throne of silence. I need you to understand what that means. Not the kind of silence you get in a library or a graveyard. Not the comforting hush after a long day. This silence is alive. It spreads. It swallows every sound like a starving mouth. And the worst part? Once you know about it, once you speak about it, the silence knows you back. I didn't believe that at first. Who would? When I first came across the phrase, the blackened throne of silence, it sounded like the kind of edgy username you'd see on some forgotten forum, or maybe a piece of bad goth poetry. I laughed. I actually laughed. But I'm not laughing anymore. Because the more I repeated it, even as a joke, the more the world around me began to quiet. At first it was subtle. A refrigerator hum vanishing. A neighbor's dog stopping mid-bark. My own breath fading until I had to check if my chest was still rising. And then came the voices. Not whispers, not screams, just the awful absence of them. People talking and then gone. Cut off like someone erased their sound with a blade. That's when I realized what I had done. By speaking of the throne, I had fed it. And by listening, you just gave it your attention. That's all it needs. I can almost hear it now behind me. The air isn't heavy, not exactly. Crossing the threshold of Hill House felt like stepping out of the world I knew and into something older, heavier, and infinitely patient. The moment the front door groaned open, a draft slid across my skin like cold fingers, raising every hair on my arms. The air inside carried the smell of damp wood and dust, a sharp tang of rot beneath it, as if the house were still digesting the centuries. Smells like my grandma's attic, Mark muttered, flicking on his flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, illuminating walls lined with torn wallpaper, faded patterns of roses curling into themselves. "Correction," Sam said, his voice bouncing against the silence. "Your grandma's dead attic." We laughed, too loud, the sound bouncing back at us in brittle echoes. It wasn't real laughter, not really. It was the kind of sound you make to cover unease. Jen crouched to examine a pile of broken glass on the floor. "Careful," she said, her voice quieter than before. "Some of this looks fresh." Sam snorted. "Fresh? In this dump? Probably just a window rattling loose. Don't get poetic on me." But I didn't miss the way his eyes kept darting to the corners, his flashlight twitching slightly in his hand. We moved deeper, the wooden floor groaning beneath us. The rooms were a patchwork of decay, collapsed ceilings, furniture draped in mildew-stained sheets, graffiti from past explorers carved into the walls. Yet there was an order to the mess, like the house allowed a certain amount of ruin but refused to completely fall apart, as if it were holding itself together, waiting. In the dining room, we found the long table still intact, coated in a thick layer of dust. Our lights glimmered off the surface, revealing faint scratches, lines gouged deep into the wood, crossing and overlapping like desperate handwriting. "Probably kids messing around," Mark said, but his voice lacked conviction. We didn't linger. The first sound came when we reached the staircase. A slow, deliberate cray. The first real disturbance happened on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were always the dead days at work. Long, flat stretches of silence where even the hum of the fluorescent lights felt bored. I was sitting at my desk, cataloging a set of brittle church records, when I realized something was wrong. Not with the papers, not with the building, but with the air itself. The clock on the wall ticked. I could see the second hand moving, but I couldn't hear it. You don't realize how much you rely on small sounds until they're gone. I leaned closer, straining, but the hand kept moving, slicing through empty space. No tick, no mechanical whir, nothing. Cheap batteries. I muttered, though even my own voice sounded lighter, thinner, as if it wasn't filling the room the way it should. I told myself it was nothing. That's what I always did in those days. Stress, bad sleep, too much coffee. I closed the ledger and decided to distract myself by calling Alex. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey," he said, his voice cutting through static. "You alive over there? Or did the dust finally get you?" I laughed. "Funny. No, I'm good. Just," I hesitated. "Does it ever feel quiet to you? Like too quiet?" "Bro, you live in a shoebox apartment above a laundromat. Quiet's a blessing." "Yeah, but I mean, like wrong quiet." "Hello," Alex snorted. "Man, you're letting that spooky throne thing get to you. You keep talking about it like it's real. Maybe that's why you're hearing things. Or not hearing them, I thought." Before I could answer, his voice cracked. Not like bad reception. Like someone had spliced the audio tape and cut out half a second. "Don't say." "What?" "Say what?" Silence. "Alex." I pulled the phone away. The line was still connected. I could hear the faint background hiss of connection, but no voice. Just nothing. I shouted his name. No response. Then, abruptly, the call dropped. When I called back, it went straight to voicemail. I should have gone. The deeper I went, the more the silence seemed to leave fingerprints. Not just on my life, but across places I'd never visited. Patterns began to emerge in obscure documents, old folklore collections, newspaper clippings that no one had digitized properly. They all circled back to the same location, a town on the edge of nowhere. One you'd never find unless you were already looking for it. Hollow Creek. It was the kind of name that belonged on the cover of a bad paperback horror novel, but it was real. Hidden off a stretch of highway that no GPS wanted to acknowledge, tucked behind forests where the trees grew too close together and the signs looked decades old. I shouldn't have gone. Every instinct screamed against it. But obsession has a way of twisting instincts until curiosity feels like survival. If the throne was real, if it had roots, Hollow Creek was the soil. The first thing I noticed as I rolled into town was how abandoned it looked. Not completely. There were cars, lights and windows, but the streets themselves were empty. No kids biking, no music leaking from shops, not even the bark of a stray dog. Just the slap of my tires on cracked asphalt. The second thing I noticed was the boards. Whole rows of houses with planks nailed across doors and windows. Some neat, some haphazard, some marked with strange, scorched symbols I couldn't place. Warnings, maybe, or seals. At the edge of the town square, I parked and stepped out. That's when I realized how unnatural it was. Even in small towns, you expect some sound. An air conditioner hum, a buzzing street lamp, the murmur of a TV through thin walls. Hollow Creek had none of that. Just the occasional shuffle of footsteps when someone peeked out a window, then vanished again. When I finally saw a human being, they didn't speak. A woman in her 70s, hunched but sharp-eyed, stood on a porch staring at me. She raised one finger to her lips, shaking her head violently when I opened my mouth to say hello. Then S. The Red Room. Even thinking the words made my chest tighten. I'd read the name in the journals, seen it scratched into steel, heard it whispered through the intercom like some kind of unholy destination. And now, standing in front of it, I knew the asylum had brought me here on purpose. The door loomed larger than I remembered, its surface slick with condensation. The warning plaque still clung to it, rust-eaten but legible, "Do not open. Authorized personnel only." But beneath it, the gouged words seemed deeper, sharper, like someone had carved them fresh that very night. The Red Room. I should have walked away. God knows I wanted to. But when I reached for the handle, it was already warm in my palm, like someone inside had been holding it, waiting for me. The door groaned as it swung inward, and for a heartbeat, I almost believed I'd opened it into another world. The air was thick and coppery, the stench of iron so strong it coated the back of my throat. My flashlight beam swept across the room, and my stomach dropped. The walls weren't painted red. They were stained red, layer upon layer of blood soaked into plaster, dripping down in rivulets that never seemed to dry. In the center sat an operating chair, its restraints splayed open like arms reaching out for an embrace. That's when the tape recorder crackled. It sat on a tray beside the chair, ancient and dust-caked. Still, the reels spun, and from its speaker came the wet, ragged sound of breathing. Then a voice. Test subject, not responding, must increase dosage. The voice was low, clinical, but there was something underneath it. Something trembling, hungry. I leaned closer, against every instinct screaming at me to stop. The recording changed. No longer the doctor's voice, but a patient's. A man, sobbing, his words broken by gasps. "Please, no more. I can't. Don't put me back in." His voice dissolved into a howl so guttural it hardly sounded human. The tape squealed, warped, and then the doctor's voice. Every time I tried to ignore the sounds, they found a new way in, through my phone, through the lights, through the spaces between words. Sleep was impossible. Food had no taste. I was rotting from the inside out, and still the walls kept whispering. Finally, something inside me snapped. Fear curdled into a kind of reckless resolve. If they wanted me to play, then fine. I'd play. But this time, I'd face them directly. The crack in the bedroom wall had widened since the first night. The plaster was brittle, crumbling at the edges, as though something was pushing from the other side. I fetched a hammer from the kitchen drawer, knelt down, and struck the wall. Once, twice, until a chunk gave way. Behind it was darkness. Not insulation, not pipes, just a hollow void yawning back at me. A faint draft kissed my skin, reeking of damp earth and something metallic, sharp. Blood, I realized. It smelled like old blood. I should have stopped. I should have patched it up, burned the whole building down, anything but what I actually did. I reached inside. My hand brushed against wood. No, planks, nailed together. A hidden passage. I pried more plaster away until I could squeeze my body through the gap. My phone's flashlight cut through the black, revealing a narrow crawl space that stretched into shadow. The walls were close, lined with gouges, claw marks, deep and desperate, as if dozens of hands had scraped for freedom. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back. Instead, I crawled forward. The space twisted, dipping lower, until I was practically dragging myself on my stomach. My phone flickered, light straining. And then, at the end of the passage, I found a chamber. It shouldn't have existed. It was bigger than the building's footprint, impossibly vast, with walls that shimmered like damp stone. The air buzzed with a low hum, vibrating in my bones. and scattered across the floor were belongings. A cracked pair of glasses, a child's stuffed bear, a purse with the strap to. When I walked out of those woods, the world looked the same, but it wasn't. The cars still passed on the highway, headlights dragging white scars across the asphalt. Shops opened. People talked. Birds scattered through the air. Normalcy moved forward, blind to the fact that I had carried something back with me. The silence wasn't absence anymore. It was presence. It moved with me, a parasite stitched to my skin, a black current flowing under every sound. And wherever I went, it followed. At first, it was subtle. Conversations dipped when I entered a room. Radios stuttered into static. Lights flickered. People would cough or falter mid-sentence. Words caught in their throats as if something pressed invisible fingers to their tongues. They never noticed me directly. They only noticed the air change. I stopped answering phone calls. The silence corrupted them, too. On the other end, friends would pause and ask if I was still there, voices fading like they were being pulled down a drain. Soon, they stopped calling. But strangers noticed. Not me, not exactly, but the thing I carried. At a diner 2 towns over, the waitress dropped her tray when I walked in, her mouth moving soundlessly as if she'd screamed, but the sound had been devoured. A child at another table began to cry, no voice escaping, only tears running down a silent face. And when I left, the noise returned as if someone flipped a switch. That's when I realized the throne wasn't locked to the hall. It was locked to me. At night, I dreamed in silence. Dreams where people I knew sat around me, mouths open, eyes wide, voices stolen. They turned toward me in unison, pointing, whispering one word without sound. Carrier. I woke with blood on my tongue from biting it, just to hear the faint crackle of pain, just to know I could still make noise. I tried music, blasted it in my apartment until neighbors pounded on the walls. But I know what you're thinking. You're listening to this, sitting safe in your room, phone glowing in your hand, or maybe you're in the dark with headphones on because you think horror feels better that way. You think distance protects you. That because you didn't follow me into Hollow Creek, because you didn't see the throne with your own eyes, you're safe. You're wrong. I didn't bring back the silence to keep it for myself. That isn't how it works. Silence is a contagion. It leaks, it seeps, it spreads into the smallest cracks. And by hearing this story, you've already opened the door. That's the final rule. The one I wasn't supposed to learn. The one no one writes down. If you listen, you belong. I didn't understand at first. I thought the rules only applied to me, the unlucky fool who stumbled too close. But the silence doesn't care about fairness. It wants witnesses. It needs them. The throne grows with every ear, every set of eyes, every moment of attention. That's why I'm telling you this now. Not as a warning, not as a confession, as an invitation. You've already felt it, haven't you? That flicker when the room goes still, when your playlist skips, when the house groans and no sound follows after. You'll tell yourself it's nothing, a glitch, a coincidence, but you'll notice it more often now. Each time you do, the throne will be a little closer, and you'll remember me. I want you to, because the silence is inside me. Yes, but it's inside you now too. You carried it in the moment you chose to keep listening. You could have stopped. You could have clicked away, but you didn't. You sat. And maybe you're sitting now, aren't you? In your chair, on your couch, curled up in bed. You think it's just comfort, just routine. But the throne doesn't care what you call it. A seat is a seat. A body is a vessel. And every vessel can be claimed. Do you hear that? No, don't look around. Don't pull your headphones off. That faint hum, that strange pressure crawling you.